Now, I just want you to think about the mountaintop moments of your life. Consider those mountaintop experiences of your life, those moments in which, whether literal or figurative, those significant moments in which you came to know the Lord in a more profound way. I have thought of several. I won't share them all with you. I'd like to share a few. The moment I was saved, I was born again. I entered into a church building one Sunday morning with ill motive. I was not going there to worship the Lord. I wasn't going to do anything mischievous. It wasn't like I was going to do anything bad when I went. I wasn't there to meet the Lord. I just showed up at church. My intent was not to worship. I was there to impress a girl. Just go ahead and say it. I entered that church building a dead man. And when I was sitting there listening, the Spirit shows up, revives my heart, restores me to life, and I walked out of that church alive, spiritually alive, not just knowing about Jesus, knowing the work of Jesus, but actually trusting my life to Jesus. Radically different. Maybe not as radical as maybe Paul, but on the road to Damascus, but it was a radical moment. I met the Lord. I wasn't on a real mountaintop, but figuratively speaking, I climbed a mountain that morning, and I met the Lord. There was a literal mountaintop experience that I had as part of a small mission team. We were in China, and we were going to distribute gospel material into this little village on top of a mountain. The village had been chosen because it was big enough to begin to grow a substantial church, but it was remote enough that it would be very difficult for authorities to get to and mess with, and the church would be able to begin to form before there was persecution they began to experience. And so we were climbing into these really crazy places, going to these places, bringing gospel materials for the underground church to come in behind and follow us and begin the work of evangelism without as much threat, because they would already have gospel material in front of them. And because of me, I've never been the person who is the most athletically gifted, but because of me, we were much slower climbing that mountain than we anticipated. I felt like we climbed stairs for about 2,000 feet. I thought I was going to die on the side of that mountain. I met the Lord many times along the side of the mountain. On the side of the mountain, I had many discussions with Him about, why did you bring me here, God? I really thought I thought this is it. This is over. I'm in China for the rest of my life, unless somebody comes and gets me off the side of this mountain. But we got to the top of the mountain. I don't know if you've been to China, but any place that's flat and green on a mountain becomes a rice paddy. We tried to find a place to sleep. We couldn't find a place to sleep. We wanted a place to sit down and wood to start a fire. We needed water. I was totally out of water. And as we're walking along this ridge line, we come to a clearing that looks like the grass has just been cut. I don't know why somebody would be cutting grass on top of a mountain, but I mean, it was trimmed. It was really beautiful. As we walk deeper into the clearing that we're walking into, we're on headlamps at this point. It's dark. It's nighttime. We're walking in and into this clearing, and there's a pond right on top of the mountain in the middle of this clearing. And then we're like, whoa, gosh, somebody starts quoting verses from Psalm 23 about leading us in green pastures and seeing still waters and these things. And there's this really profound moment happening. And then as we celebrate this, we're deciding it's time to have dinner, and we need wood to cook our food. And there's nothing dead. Everything that we're surrounded by is green and lush. And I said something as we're spanning around this clearing, trying to find wood along the edges of this clearing. I said, I wouldn't be surprised if we find a stack of wood up here to start our fire. And immediately upon saying that, a guy across the clearing, who it's dark, I can't see across the clearing, he says, what did you just say? I said, I wouldn't be surprised if we find a stack of wood waiting for us up here. And there's a stack of wood on the other side of the clearing that I can't see, that he just found as I said those words. Man, talk about a worship experience. Talk about a moment. We stood on that mountain reading the Psalms and celebrating and singing praises to God. That was a mountaintop moment to meet God in His provision and His care for His people as they live and do the work that He's called them to do. Never forgotten it. For a long time, I couldn't tell it without bursting into tears. You know me, that's nothing new, but that I got through it this morning surprises me. More recently, 3 years ago, as my dad was at the end of his life, the Lord met me on a train. Of all places, an Amtrak train. He met me on that train and then on a mountain range in Montana as I spent some time wrestling with the reality of my dad's death and what that meant for my dad. What would come of him? What would become of him? And I had this great concern because much of his life was given to ministry. He planted a church. The church is still there. It's in Jacksonville, Arkansas. The church still exists. And my mom was getting phone calls about Brother Connie and how Brother Connie was used of the Lord to lead that person to Christ. And that was so true of so much of his life. But the 40 to 50 years preceding his death, it was very difficult to have any conversation with him about anything to do with the Lord. His last statement to me about anything gospel-oriented was, well, Seth, at my age, I'm not going to cry out to God. It was very difficult for me to hear, and I wrestled with that, and what does that mean for my dad? And so on that train, riding around America, watching his creation go by, and sitting in that mountain range in Montana once I got to the place I was going, I had another mountaintop experience where I realized I don't need to know what's become of my dad because I know the God who knows. And that then suddenly poured out to the rest of my life. I don't need to have the power to accomplish everything because I know the God who does. And then that quickly began to pour out into other areas of my life, and I don't need to have control of every circumstance and situation because I know the God who is in control of all these circumstances and situations. And I grew immensely in those years. My 3 years ago was a fundamental shift, not just in my life, but in my ministry. I've done this for, at that time it would have been 14 or 15 years officially as the pastor of this church, but I'd been in ministry for even longer in just different leadership positions. And suddenly I had grown to a level of trust that I thought I'd already been at on that mountaintop experience. Again, not really literal. I was in a train for much of it. It's in moments like these that we experience God in very profound ways, right? It's not to say that God's not present with us every step of the way. He's just as present in the valleys as he is on the mountaintops, but it's in those moments on the mountaintops that we begin to recognize his presence, his plan, his purposes, his glory, his greatness, his goodness. We see those things more clearly in those moments. I hope as I've described some of my mountaintop experiences with the Lord, you're able to reflect and recognize some of your mountaintop experiences. And if you haven't, I pray that today would be one of those mountaintop experiences and you meet God in a new way. Moses' life and ministry was marked by several mountaintop experiences. It was at Mount Horeb, Sinai, where Moses first encountered the burning bush. You can see that in Exodus 3. It surprised me. It's one of those little details that I've read past I don't know how many times, and then suddenly I'm studying this week, and it dawns on me, the same mountain that he's going to get the law on is he's meeting God in the burning bush. But then after Egypt, he's sent into Egypt, and he takes 8 trips up and down Sinai after he's led Israel out of Egypt. He receives God's word, the law, for Israel on top of that mountain. He prayed for mercy after Israel rejected God, after they worshiped the golden calf. He prays for their mercy on top of that mountain with God, and he meets and experiences God's mercy in very tangible ways. Moses saw God's glory with his own eyes. In fact, it was such an experience that when he comes down that mountain, he's got to veil his face because God's glory is reflected off of him. He is radiant. He is shining because the glory that he experienced was so fundamentally, physically transformative to him. And here it is in this final ascent. It struck me again as I read and studied this week. I've never thought of death as a mountaintop experience, but on this final ascent, he climbs a mountain to meet the God who's called him, who's led him, who's empowered him, who's equipped him, who he's heard speak as if someone speaks to a friend, face to face. And instead of going to the land that he longs to go into, he's going to climb this mountain and he's going to meet God one more time. And here's the lesson I think that we can learn from this final ascent as we look at this man of God, at this servant of God who was used so mightily of God. I don't think the lesson for us to learn is about Moses. I think the lesson for us to learn is about our God. I think that's what the mountaintops are meant to be, to teach us something about who he is and what he's doing. In death and life, God's people have this great hope. In death and life, God's people have this great hope. His word endures forever. His work always gets finished, and his will always prevails.